Hello there, Commonwealth from here. The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD, despite little to no extra content, is a great example of how you can return to a past release with problems and enhance it without changing too much of the original, or the length of it for that matter. Most of these tie to not wasting your time with unnecessary information or boring stuff, so I will not waste it either. Just leave a like, subscribe and press that notification bell if you haven't already, and let's get into the best changes Skyward Sword HD has to offer. Motion Joy-Con or stick button controls. The motion controls in Skyward Sword were greatly immersive when they worked properly, but they were also a burden when it came to getting a remaster. Luckily, the Zelda team realized that motion controls in 2021 isn't as hip as it was in 2011. Luckily, the Switch has the even better Joy-Cons, but let's be honest, most wanted to play this game, at least to a degree, with the same button layout as Breath of the Wild. 2 analog sticks and buttons fully utilized. And with the handheld only with no detachable Joy-Con Switch Lite, there was no other option but to implement stick and button based controls for this game, meaning no longer forced motion controls, as we now can play with our Pro Controller or in a car on the go with 2 analog sticks and buttons controlling Link and his button action. This control change and option alone is a big enough reason to buy Skyward Sword HD and never play the original Wii version again, but there are far more reasons than in more traditional controls, and the next one is handheld play in 720p 60 frames per second. Skyward Sword was in 480p on the Wii in late 2011, when many had already transitioned to full HD or at least HD ready TVs. And that was not a good timing, since just 12 months later Nintendo made the HD jump with the Wii U. Hence Skyward Sword was a victim of the system the game launched on, but now, with its 10-year anniversary version for Zelda's 35th anniversary, the game that begins the storyline in the Zelda series is finally in HD, both on the big screen and on the go. 720p on the Switch and Switch Lite displays to be precise. Even so, HD resolutions is one thing. 60 frames per second with button and stick controls is something completely different. Being able to bring the adventure that everyone thought would remain bound to TVs is just so liberating, especially with a midsummer release when you just want to chill with the game outside while working on your tan. So is handheld play, especially with the Switch OLED from October, the ultimate way to play Skyward Sword HD? Not necessarily, as TV play offers full HD, 1080p, 60 frames per second. This, seriously, this 1080p 60 FPS. That is the dream that for now is unreachable for most big Switch titles. But Skyward Sword HD, out of all the titles, is the first 3D Zelda game on a Nintendo system that runs at this holy resolution combined with frame rate number. Crystal clear as long as you don't play on a gigantic 4K TV, but those 60 FPS, that is something else. Meaning that Skyward Sword HD both plays great but also looks great, no matter the play session. This game looks absolutely gorgeous in HD, and let's just say full HD up to 50-inch TVs or Switch OLED 720p from October will be the ultimate combo for this game. An HD adventure wherever you go and with whatever controller you want. Now that is the Skyward Sword experience I wish I had when playing the game for the first time at the end of 2011. Technically speaking, from a visual and frame rate level, it is Breath of the Wild level, and actually far beyond it, with its 1080p versus 900p and 60 FPS versus 30 FPS. And there is more tying this HD version to Breath, like dual analog camera controls. As a gamer who thinks that analog camera controls is the most important feature in video games these days, I cannot overstate how important it is that Skyward Sword HD has this mechanic, meaning that Ocarina of Time 3D is now the only 3D Zelda game to not have any dual analog camera controls. The dual analog camera for Majora's Mask 3D was a game changer for that game, and it is as much for Skyward Sword HD, even though it is a little restricted in undocked mode due to the sword controls placed to the right analog stick, but when you're locked onto an enemy, you don't need free camera controls, so it is still a great compromise. Skyward Sword's levels may not have the same need for this feature as Breath of the Wild and its sequel's open world, but it is still a very welcome addition that in my eyes showed that they wanted to elevate Skyward Sword HD that extra notch. But there's even more than that, like autosaving, which is a small but at the same time big implementation, as in Skyward Sword the only place to save was through bird statues. It is just more convenient and gratefully a feature that isn't locked away behind an amiibo, like the departure from surface to the sky and straight back to where you departed from the surface is, usually from the bazaar of upgrades and crafting at SKYLOFT. Speaking of, The opening at Skyloft is now far less annoying before the first departure down to the surface. Yes, just yes, as Skyward Sword has the by far most overstretched and filled with filler and terrible content opening, apart from Twilight Princess. In both cases, it took forever to reach the first dungeon the game has to offer. Now, Skyward Sword's opening is so much more enjoyable that there is no point comparing this opening to Twilight Princess. It is far better thanks to reducing the number of forced dialogue and chores at Skyloft in the opening 2 hours of the game. The game already has enough filler on the surface later on, so I can't do anything else but say hallelujah, as one of my most hated openings in video games is no longer a part of that exclusive club. Is the opening now anywhere near the Wind Waker, Ocarina of Time and Breath of the Wild? Absolutely not. Something I never thought would have happened in this HD version of the game. Fast-forwarding dialogue is another self-explanatory change that allows us to get away from unnecessary conversations and information dumps to continue questing. And even here we find changes to not pull us out from our gameplay. Streamlined item information. See it once and you don't need to see this information again after booting up the game. No need to remind me what a heart or rupee is and break the flow of wherever I am at the moment. Respect our time and don't extend the game more than you have to. That is a message that reached the developers and made them realize that this game benefits from all simplifications that you can give it. And in this regard, the change, or in this case removal of self-explanatory information, is another simple step in the right direction to make this game more enjoyable. Interruptions really suck out the fun in Zelda. A repetition of stuff we already know only makes it worse. So let's keep things simple so we can just focus on the gameplay and story. And in this regard, we have to mention the change of skippable cutscenes, which is a big deal for those who already know the story and want to focus on the gameplay or just skip intros to battles that you don't want to see. With this feature, nothing gets in the way of your gameplay if you want to. I personally would never skip story cutscenes in Skyward Sword, or actually, there are some scenes that I definitely skip past on closer inspection. Most of them would have involved Fi, but she has gotten the most radical change, namely the default of disabling her constant interruptions. An option to close Pandora's box and never have to listen to endless repetition alone makes the character more likable, and Skyward Sword HD into a less annoying experience. All of the previous changes from the Wii version are great, but shutting up Fi during the quest is one of the best presents we have ever received from the Zelda team. They really took the hint and addressed many of the easily fixable problems with this game and delivered us a version of the game that is redefining what Skyward Sword is in 2021, as still messy, but far less messy than up to now first quest in the Zelda timeline. And there are even more changes that are less noticeable at first, like way better loading times compared to the original. And the loading times are a big deal because you spend less time waiting and more time playing. Combined, the changes should be cherished even though they still leave behind many frustrations that, let's face it, will never be fixed with this game. Those were the best changes made to Skyward Sword HD and which have made this game much more enjoyable for so many people around the world. If you agree that change is good, then leave a like, subscribe with notification bell on to help us to 300,000 subscribers and a chance to win a Nintendo Switch OLED plus Nintendo game of your choice. Finally, and as always, a great thanks goes to our patreon.com/CommonRealm patrons and our YouTube members, all new ones which from now on will be shouted out, for joining, besides our one and only royal producer Chalshash. You all rock and please enjoy one or both of these two awesome videos.